Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. On this episode, I'm really excited to have a long-term mentor of mine and someone I'm happy to call a friend, Mr. Jeff Kirkham. Jeff, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So Jeff is like the most interesting man in the world, commercial except in real life. So 28 years as a Green Beret, including some time at a classified unit. He was undercover DEA. He's written a book series, starts with Black Autumn, sold 700,000 copies so far. That's now become a movie that's about to come out. He's an inventor. I carry his rats tourniquets and all my snowmobile stuff in case there's an accident. He's been a longtime supporter and helper at Child Rescue, teaching courses for us and helping me personally. He's got a credible company called Mustang Medicine that helps people as they're trying to make decisions about the new version of themselves. There's equine therapy and all sorts of great stuff, retreats in Southern Utah. Jeff, I'm probably only missing like 10 things besides your, just finished a master's degree in nursing and is now doing a master's degree in psychology. Give me some of the highlights I'm missing here.
I think you hit them all. I mean, it's, I try to stay as busy as possible. My mom used to tell me that time's going to pass no matter what you do, so you can use it or not. And I'm a big believer on, being an emergency preparedness minded person, where the books came from. The lightest, most valuable prep you can have is the knowledge between your ears.
Yeah. You've started so many companies. One that a lot of people would be familiar with. I just saw you on the podcast, the Black Rifle Coffee podcast. Started that back with Evan back in the day. And even though you exited, it was fun to see you on that. And what was fun for me was hearing that he had just gotten out of, I think, Special Forces, is that right? And was at a rock climbing thing. And our mutual friend, Tom Bigley, was teaching. And he's like, all of a sudden this long-haired guy, I think with like earrings and Metallica t-shirt shows up. And I'm like, I talk over to Tom. I'm like, who the F is that guy? And he's like, don't worry, that's Jeff. He's cool. And so I felt somewhat proud that I also got to know you through our mutual friend, Mr. Tom Bigley. Big shout out to him, fellow child rescue supporter and just all around good human being.
Yeah, that was, so we were up at City of the Rocks, and like Evan was a young Special Forces guy and had just gotten out of the Q course not long before. And Special Forces, our qualification course, we call it the Q course. And he had just finished, and we were up at City of the Rocks in Idaho doing a rock climbing trip. And and at that time, my hair was down to here, and he was, and I had a long beard, and back then nobody had beards. The only people that had beards were like bikers. And so Evan was like, who's the homeless guy, And so it was pretty funny. And then we became friends. And I was his team sergeant on the, leading up to the invasion. And then I switched over to another team. And then Evan actually was a big whitewater kayaker at the time. So we came home from the invasion of Iraq, and we both went on a trip as kind of a way to kind of decompress, I guess. So we went whitewater rafting. We talk a little bit about that in that Black Rifle podcast. And it was just, for me, I had, I'd never whitewater kayaked before, but it was so cool because it's one of those activities that it absolutely puts you in the moment. You have to be absolutely present for you to get through navigate some of these whitewater, or else you're going to flip over and become a yard sale, as we like to say, on the water, because your stuff goes everywhere. But it was a blast. A lot of fond memories, for over the years running around with Evan. Anybody that knows him knows he's a very funny, charismatic. He's a character.
Well, he is, and thank you for the introduction to him. I remember meeting him years ago through you. So how many years were you involved in Black Rifle?
Just for a few years, just when on the startup phase, getting it up and moving. I mean, Evan was the energy and the inspiration behind that. And so I was more of like the cheerleader and supporting, and then some insights and stuff like that. And I like more of the startup, kind of the startup rodeo, small groups. And so when Black Rifle was turning into, I mean, it's a behemoth now, but even then, when it was turning into the corporation, it was like, you guys take this thing and run with it. And they, and they've done absolutely amazing things since then. And so, and then I exited so that I could work on some other projects that led to me going to school and exploring other avenues with some businesses and being able to continue to invent new stuff. So I've got a bunch of different patents for different products and stuff. So, it allowed me to expand and work on me. So, and I've got, I went before they went IPO. I exited, but I have no regrets. I'm incredibly blessed with the life that I have right now, and so I'm very, very, very fortunate.
Well, I think some of the most inspirational things is that so often entrepreneurs or investors, we feel like we're the only one going through the crap. And it's so inspirational to hear that other super successful people didn't have smooth sailing, but that they overcame their situation. Do you want to tell us about one of like the early tough things in the beginning days of Black Rifle and what you guys did to overcome it?
Some of this is probably like pull the string in the back of the doll and you'll hear the message come out, and it's probably the same with, in the early days, it was, getting vendors to actually produce products and show stuff up on time, and then miscalculating how much something's going to cost, but forgetting to figure in the shipping when you're running super narrow margins or like all of a sudden we get a rash of a whole bunch of orders, but the roaster's not up, which is one of the reasons why, Evan was always so big on, we've got to get our own roaster. We've got to get our own roaster, because trying to rely on some of the other places it was always problematic, but where you run into your problems are not the vendor's problems. And so then all of a sudden you're trying to move because the vendor's running into some of the same problems. And it can get pretty dicey, especially during like Black Fridays and the holidays and stuff that's going on. And so these are all things that any entrepreneur will know, because when you start figuring out there's COGS, right? The cost of goods, but then there's true COGS. And it's all that stuff that, when you're young or you're new, you forget to put in there. You're like COGS. You're like, oh, well, this widget cost me 5 cents, so that's my COGS. And it's like, well, no, there's shipping that's included in there, and there's your time, and there's the web page, and there's the light staying on, and there is the people that you're paying to work. So then you nail all that down to true cost of goods. And all of a sudden it becomes a very, like, you're like, oh crap, we've got to increase our margins. We've got to move faster. We've got to drive down. One of the things I did that with Rat's Tourniquet, so we have my tourniquet and we were selling it all over the world at one point. And
Can you just explain what's different about it? Let's start there, and so people get a vision.
sure, yeah. So the Rat's Tourniquet is it's an elastic tourniquet. So most tourniquets that you get are, people will think about it's a strap, and then it's got a stick that spins around, and that stick is the fancy word for that stick is called a windlass. A windlass is just a stick, right? And so, well, my tourniquet uses an elastic pressure, and most of your tourniquets that are out there are 1.5 to 2 inches wide. Mine's 1/2 inch, because what I figured out was you can do multiple wraps to make up the width of what you needed to do to stop the blood flow. So tourniquets are the safest, most effective means of stopping massive hemorrhage or bleeding to death. And the most preventable cause of death on the battlefield and in the civilian world is massive hemorrhage, car wrecks, accidents. And so a lot of the accidents, or a lot of the saves that we have with Rat's Tourniquet is just bizarre accidents. I mean, there's only a few gunshot wounds. There's a whole bunch of strange, weird accidents. People going through pane glass windows by accident, or cutting their leg climbing over a fence, or like an arrow is sitting in the grass and they end up punji spiking themselves through the leg, or just all of these weird, bizarre accidents that would happen that led to saves. Well, with my tourniquet, we were selling enough tourniquet at one time that so you've got the product, right? And I figured out one component of the product that I was making it for. I ended up saving 5 cents on that product. Well, over the space of a year, that savings in 5 cents conservatively, now it varies a little bit, but that saved me $30,000 at the end of the year. So saving 5 cents. So paying attention to these pennies, right? Saved me 5 cents, but that was $30,000 at the end of the year. And then that continued to increase as my sales volume increased, which is just a classic example of Ben Franklin saying, a small, slow leak will sink the sturdiest ship is the same thing. So in that 30 grand that I saved was actually as money back in my pocket, the money that I could put back into the company and continue to expand on marketing and whatnot. So that's just one example, but it's sometimes the obvious things aren't so obvious.
Yeah. Before we move on from Black Rifle, I'm not a coffee drinker, but you don't have to be a coffee drinker to see an incredible marketing play. I mean, you guys positioned, you were the anti-Starbucks. You really spoke to a population that didn't feel connected to the other coffee brands. Any other thoughts that you have for people who are thinking about, I mean, arguably coffee was an extremely saturated market. There were already Starbucks on every corner of the world at that point. And yet you show up and, I mean, obviously started something that became massive. Any advice for folks who are trying to carve out their own subcategory of something that already exists?
Yeah. So if you keep in mind, right, when you have to educate your customer, it gets very expensive and things run a little bit slower. So with a tourniquet, I had to educate my customer a little bit, but everybody knew because the war was going on, everybody knew what a tourniquet was. I had to educate them that what was different about my tourniquet because it's quite different than what the stereotypical tourniquet is. So extrapolate that with Black Rifle Coffee. And so what happened was, I don't have to educate people on what coffee is. With 75% of Americans drink coffee and it's something like 56%. I mean, these are old stats that are probably 10 years old now, and it's probably increased. But at the time, and it was over half of Americans drink coffee every single day. That's the way that they start their day. So now all of a sudden, if I'm selling a product, I don't have to educate you on this new product. It's coffee. And then what Evan realized was, well, wait a minute, the people that we want to, the demographic that we're after, who are we going to sell like specifically to? So got really specific. We're going to sell to the veteran crowd. So that's a very small segment of America, really. But in terms of how many on your sales, it can be huge in sales. And so what happened was that focus happened on the veteran crowd, and then that expanded to the 2A friendly crowd. So as the toehold or the chink in the armor was found with the veteran crowd, then all of a sudden started winning all of them over. Then it expanded to the 2A crowd. And then from the 2A crowd, then that expanded to the conservative, the conservative crowd for the US. So all of a sudden, and the nice thing is veterans at that time, the vast majority of them, they knew what Starbucks was, but most of them were drinking coffee. I won't say their names here, but they were drinking coffee that you buy off the shelf. And there was no microbrews or that's a beer, but there was no small batch roasting or any of that. So then all of a sudden these guys were drinking not very good coffee. And then you hit them with a good product and they drink it and they're like, oh, now all of a sudden they can't go back to drinking the other stuff that that they were used to, like at, gas stations or whatever there that tasted just, I mean, once you have the other tastes horrible.
Well, I always respected what you guys were doing over there with also your staff. Like I remember you bring me down to the factories in the early days and you've got guys that you operated with in special forces, like Afghans that you had brought their whole family over, gave them jobs and helped them with this next chapter of their life and really giving them a leg up. And I always thought that was cool.
Yeah, it was one of those things where we firmly believed, like the Afghans that I worked with. I mean, I became friends with them, and so when some of them came over to the U.S., this was prior to the fall of Kabul. But when they came over, they're looking for jobs, and it's like, well, we know these guys, we know they're good people. It's like you start looking at employees, right? Well, what do you want in an employee? Somebody that's hardworking, somebody that's honest, somebody that's going to stick around. Well, we knew these guys. They had already done essentially the first 3/4 of the job interview, and it's like, hey, you want a job? And so they jumped on there like, yeah, absolutely. Because it was us or they were trying to find jobs somewhere else. And a lot of them were working, Wally is a good example. I've known Wally since, if you go to Black Rifle site and they've got a video that describes Wally. And I've known Wally since he was 18. And we worked together extensively overseas over the course of over a decade. And so when he had escaped because the Taliban were actively hunting him and his wife, at one point he was moving him and his family every month to stay ahead of the Taliban. And he still worked with the Americans. And this is a guy that's doing some of the most hair-raising missions that you'll never ever hear about. And he was a steadfast ally and friend of the U.S. He's a U.S. citizen now. He earned his citizenship. And I say that he earned it. And then, when he came over and started working at the thing, when I found him, I was doing a podcast with one of my companies called Ready Man. And, so I'm doing a podcast and all of a sudden one of my guys comes in and he's like, hey, there's this guy by the name of Mohammed Taslim that says he knows you. And I was like, oh, my former life. Well, nobody knew Wally by Mohammed. Everybody called him Wally. I didn't know him by Mohammed. So I go in, and Wally had very uncharacteristically long hair for Afghans because his hair grows, I swear, about an inch a day. I mean, it's unbelievable. You see this guy one day and by the end of the week, he's got to go in for a haircut. It's unbelievable. And so I go in and I look at the picture and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Wally. Well, the part of the story that I didn't tell you is I had heard Wally had been killed in an ambush because the Taliban were actively hunting him. And so I saw him and I was like, that's Wally. He's dead. And so I typed on the thing. I was like, hey, Wally, this is Jeff. And he's like, Mr. Jeff, how are you? I haven't seen you forever. And so I asked him a question that only he would know. And I was like, and the question was, how did you become the CAT commander? Well, the CAT was one of the probe CATs, were one of the containment apprehension teams that we had in that program. I was like, how did you become the CAT commander? And he's like, I won the boxing match. And only Wally would know that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is truly Wally. So kind of that pseudo James Bond, it's like, I hear there's snow in the mountains in the Alps. Yes, but it's raining in the Amazon, so the bona fides there. And so we started talking. Well, Wally here, he was a top tier commander in the top tier program, in our top tier program. I mean, he's an amazing individual. And he's working at a gas station in Virginia, Southern Virginia, right outside of Richmond. He's living in the ghetto. He's having a horrible time. The living conditions were so bad that he was like, I'm going to go back to Afghanistan. I can't stay here. And his family convinced him to stay. He got hold of me. And then I went to Evan, and Evan had met him when we were working together in Afghanistan in the later years. And it was like, well, let's get him on a plane. So I called him. I'm like, Wally, where are you at? Okay, there's a plane ticket. Fly out here and check it out. So it was like, come visit. And no promises or anything. So he jumps on the plane. He flies out. He stays at the house for a week. I take him up to the coffee company, show him around. He sees Evan, and then at one point I'm like, hey, Wally, what do you think? Now, Afghanistan, like Kabul, is very, very, very similar to Salt Lake City. It's the same latitude. It's surrounded by mountains. I mean, they even have the inversion in the wintertime, like what we have in Salt Lake Valley. And so I'm like, Wally, what do you think? And he's like, oh, Utah is amazing. This is beautiful. It's just like Afghanistan. I was like, okay, go home, pack up your stuff, move your family out here. We'll pay for everything. and we'll find you a place to live. And so he was like, really? And I was like, absolutely. So he went home, and we helped him move. He drove his family out. They finished the school year out for his kids, drove his family out. We found him a place to live, and the rest is, as they say, is history. Now he is very successful. He had an opportunity to get on his feet. He's not getting any, he got off of the government subsistence and all of that stuff. He had some in the beginning, and then he got a job, and then and now his son just graduated, and he's getting ready to go to college. And I mean, it's like literally the American success story. And it's stuff like that in business that really makes it worth it. It really makes it like meaningful, because we've meaningfully, is that even a word, made it a positive change for Wally. And then there's a variety of these other guys that very, very, very similar stories. Like their girls are graduating high school. They would have never even graduated elementary school if they'd stayed in Afghanistan. And so it's all of this stuff that it's like, man, this is super cool. This is what it's all worth. This is what it's all about. And so, and ultimately that's probably one of the catalysts that led me into what I'm doing now with Mustang Medicine and whatnot. But very cool, very, very cool win there that happened with Wally and several of the other guys that are there. Just amazing.
I love it. You had actually told me about him, so I was really excited when I got to meet him when we went down to the factory. What a great story. Let's talk about rats for a second, though. Being an inventor, you have I think you have 12 different careers in your life. Let's talk about being an inventor. So tell us something that went wrong with rats. Tell us something that wasn't going to work, or you weren't going to get the patent, or you were upside down on this, and some specific story you sold.
Well, I'll tell you, a great story is at one point, so I was competing against some other tourniquets that were in the market. And I hate the word competition, because I believe that the ocean is so broad and so deep that it's like the whole competition thing is kind of ridiculous to me. The pie is so big. And if you feel like the pie, I come from an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset. Unfortunately, there are those that come from the scarcity mindset. So anyways, I was being relentlessly attacked at one point on social media for my invention. And then once we kept racking up the saves and whatnot, well, they could no longer attack the product. So it was the classic strawman argument, or the classic ad hominem argument, where they started coming after me. I was like, well, you're a bad person because of whatever thing that they were making up. And, the life of stuff like this on social media is about 2 weeks. At least it was back then. It was about a week or 2 weeks. And then it dies off. This was a concerted attack against me, my character, and my family and my friends for over 3 months. And so to the point that bots were attacking me. So somebody had reached out to some of the click farms, and every post about rats, there was multiple bots that were in there. So I was like, I tried answering a bunch of them, but you're not going to, people that are going to troll are going to troll. And then if it's bots, it's just like, well, okay. And we now know that bots are a very real thing. At the time, people are like, it's not bots. You're crazy. You're being paranoid. And I was like, no, these are bots, or it's people running multiple accounts that are constantly attacking. And it's like, who would do that unless they're being prompted to do that for some reason, right? And the guys all speak with their English isn't quite right, so they're writing and it's like, oh, your English isn't quite right. Are you in Pakistan, or are you in, Sri Lanka or some other place? So it's like, it's a big indicator. But that was a very difficult time because it was nonstop. Now, looking back, right, there's always a silver lining. I think it was Barnum Bailey that said there's no such thing as bad press. And so the concerted attacks that were against me and against my product really drugged my product into the top 3 tourniquets into the market. So because they were constantly talking, it's like Trump, right? So Trump was constantly attacked over the last 4 years. Well, what was the consequence of that? Trump was kept in the news feed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, continuously for 4 years. If he'd have tried to buy that type of media coverage, it would have cost billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. And then ultimately, well, he won the presidency. And so now, and so it's kind of a parallel there, right? Not that the Rats Tourniquet's the presidency, but these attacks at the time was horrific. People, all kinds of threats and everything else, and telling me that I should like give up my special forces tab because, blah, 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 just lies, 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 lies. But you're dealing with this, and psychologically and emotionally, you're dealing with this stress like every single day. It's like, oh my goodness, what are they going to say now? And eventually all things pass, right? And then I ended up reached the point where it's like, even with all of this going on, sales were continuing to go through the roof. And so it was like, crap. So now I'm dealing with the social media, and I'm dealing with trying to maintain enough inventory so that we can ship this stuff out, because now we're selling in Germany, and we're selling in Spain, and we're selling in Sweden and Denmark, and on in Canada, and on and on and on. And so but it was a challenge at the time when you get down into the trenches, and like you can't see over the edge, and all you hear is the machine guns from the enemy coming in. It's really easy to get monofocused on that stuff. But that was probably one of the greater challenges that I ran into in business.
And you never see the silver lining when you're in the middle of it, right?
No, it's really hard to see the silver lining when you're there. But now, I can look back and go, oh, well, that actually ended up making me a lot of money. And so, okay, I'll take it.
So before we move on from rats, I just want to tell everybody why I think they should get one is for saving yourself. It's a really great system for being able to do it one-handed. It's got like this little like boat hitch looking thing on a long bungee cord, and the ability to save yourself is quite reasonably and simply, I think, is a big advantage on it.
Yeah, the biggest advantage with rats is our skill degradation is far below the other tourniquets that are out there. And what I mean by skill degradation is, we had a guy, one of our saves, as a matter of fact, he called me. He's out in West Virginia, and he called me and he was like, "Hey, I used your tourniquet to save my life." And I was like, "Well, tell me the story." And he's like, "Yeah, he has a medical condition, and he was doing the dishes." Remember, I said most of our saves have nothing to do with violence. He was doing the dishes, and he passed out, and he fell on a steak knife that went through his arm, sliced the brachial artery. So he passed out, he hit the ground, and then he came to a couple of seconds later. And he said, "I woke up and I was spraying blood all over the cabinets in my kitchen." Because what had happened when he had passed out, what he realized, his dog had come by and grabbed the knife and pulled it back out. And so he's just spraying blood everywhere. So he's like, I had your tourniquet. And so he put his tourniquet on one arm, and then was able to call 911, and then and went to the hospital, and they're like, "You saved your own life." And I asked him, I said, "How long had it been since you had practiced with the tourniquet before you put it on?" And he was like, over a year since he was like, "When I first got it, I used it a couple times, and then I threw it in my pocket and I just forgot about it." Cause he's a kind of a prepper dude. And he's like, "I just put it in my pocket and kind of forgot about it." And he's like, then all of a sudden, a little over a year later, he's using it to save his life. And so being able to maintain that skill and not forget, skill degradation is a very real thing. That's why in the U.S. military, we train so much. And so for him being able to do that under stress on yourself, that was a huge, huge, huge testament to the product.
Well, yeah, and you think about also stressful environments and gross motor movements and all the things that people don't think about. Of like, I hear about guys, meeting people from a community, say like getting in their first gunfights, and all of a sudden it's like you feel like your fingers don't work because you got all this adrenaline, cortisol coursing through the bloodstream, and new experiences and things that you would normally find very easy, fine motor movement become hard, right? So
Absolutely. And it's hard, and it's really, we train, 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 train. It's hard to prepare for everything. And that's kind of, that's a good segue into the book, Black Autumn, because it's one of those things where we tried to capture. You can't. It's like, even though you think you're ready for everything, you're not ready for everything, and it's like, you prepare, 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 but that's where community is so incredibly important for what it is that you're doing, because you just can't possibly think of everything that's on there, and you're going to screw it up. And it's like, how do you handle the screw up, or not? And so that's what the kind of the book series. It's a post-apocalyptic book, so that's the book series.
Just before we go into Black Autumn, do you have an estimate of how many lives you saved because of your invention with the tourniquet?
I mean, at this point, the ones of people that have called in and told us, we're at hundreds at this point. Now, we've sold a bunch to overseas, and a bunch went to the Ukraine and whatnot. And I don't run the company anymore. I sold the company, but just, I'm still very much in contact with the folks that bought it over at Rapid Medical. And because I help them out from time to time. And they get reports all the time. But I mean, like the wartime, it's really hard to say. I mean, we sent thousands of them to Afghanistan and Iraq and Africa. And so it impossible. But here in the States, hundreds.
That's got to feel fun, like you did something that made a difference.
Bro, I'll tell you, probably one of the most emotional moments was a guy called me and he was like, "Hey, I used your tourniquet to save my dad's life." And it was like, "What?" And well, he actually had emailed me, and I was like, "Hey, can you call me?" And he was like, "Yeah." And so he called me, and I was like, "Dude, you got to tell me this story." And he said, "Yeah, my dad was in a tree stand, and all of a sudden they're out deer hunting. I think they're in Pennsylvania or something. They're out deer hunting, and his dad, did something, and he fell out of the tree stand, and the lower bones in your leg are called your tib and your fib, tibula, fibula. He put both of those bones through the side of his leg. So he's on the ground screaming and yelling for his son, who is, about 100 meters away or so. So his son's like, "Oh my gosh, he's being attacked by a bear." So he grabs his pistol, leaves the medical kit at the thing, and runs out to see his dad. Well, here his dad is. His dad's on Coumadin. His dad's on blood thinners because he has a heart condition. And he's spraying blood everywhere. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, my dad's going to die. I need a tourniquet." He goes, "I just so happen," he was like, "I always carry the rat in my pocket outside of the kit." And he was like, so he put the tourniquet on his dad's leg, stopped the flow of blood, even with the blood thinners that were on there, and picked him up. And then they hobbled, and then they had to drive for about an hour before they could get to medical care. Here's this guy, he's a man, telling me that he just used my product to save his dad's life. I want to tell you what, you want to talk about unbelievably humbling moment, where it's just like, okay, all of the social media bashing and all the ad hominem attacks and the threats and all of that just became worth it. I mean, it was like you're a small part of saving somebody's life, and it's unbelievably meaningful.
Wow, incredible. So let's talk about Black Autumn. I remember starting the book and making me nervous because it's so realistic, and I live in Utah, and the stories are there. I started getting anxiety because it was so realistic. Obviously, it's resonated over these 9 books. I think 700,000 copies plus sold. Now the movie. This idea of like, what if stuff stops working right in society, and the way we think of things breaks down. And why don't you give people just a quick overview on the plot, and then let's talk the movie side.
Yeah, so Black Autumn, and like, it's every writer's dream, right? So we got picked up by Angel Studios, and they're making the movie, releases here in like 2 weeks, for The Homestead, which is the movie that's based off the book. But the premise of the book, it's funny that you say that, but the number one the number one feedback that we get from people is they read the book and they let us know. They're like, my one piece of feedback with your book is it's terrifying because that could actually happen. So it was like, okay, because we originally, when we wrote the book, it's funny that the story of Black Autumn is somewhat funny because, when you're writing a book, you're like, we made so many mistakes when we were writing it. Like one of the main characters' name is Jeff Kirkham, right down here and so that was never supposed to happen. But when you're writing books, you write a book and you're collaborating, or you're not collaborating, you're curating content from, the people that right? And so it's like, okay, if we're going to write a book, then I'm going to be the protagonist, and Jason and I wrote it together, so he's a protagonist. And so we had like 15 points of view, which if you write a book, do not do that because it is horrible to try and keep track of all that, but you keep track of it because it's all people that you kind of know and you picture. And so, and that's why like Evan's a character in there and some of the other folks. So the premise of the book is it's not one thing that causes the world to stumble. It's a whole bunch of little things, and we now know those are called black swan events. It's a whole bunch of little things that tie together in kind of a weird way that it's unforeseeable. And so when they tie together and you wouldn't be able to guess that from the past, it's like, oh my gosh. So the financial crisis of 2008 is a perfect example. Looking back, it's like, it's easy to see how these things would tie together. But if you were in 2006 or 7 or 5 looking forward, it's almost impossible. And then all of a sudden these things tie together. Really good ideas that seem really good at the time, all of a sudden are like, oh my gosh, if we do that, that's going to lead to catastrophe, which, the 2008 financial crisis, for a lot of people, it was a catastrophe. It wasn't the end of the world, but it was a financial catastrophe for so many people that lost everything that was there. And we came close to really the world stumbling and having a hard time. That is the premise of Black Autumn. We take some events and we tie them together, and they're seemingly inconsequential, but tied together like the nuke that goes off. The nuke, spoiler alert, the nuke kills like 50 people. So it's like not a big consequence that takes place, but the panic that it causes because of some other events that have already taken place, all of a sudden causes the system to start dominoing down because it gets overwhelmed. And so, and it continues that way. And the characters in there, the Jeff character and the Jason character, we're all flawed. We didn't want to do the chest beating, Navy SEAL Green Beret book. It was like, no, we're better prepared in some areas, but to say you're prepared in all areas really is not true. And the message, the underlying message is, it takes a community. You have to have a community. And that is as true in the post-apocalypse as it is for us today, which segues into, and we'll talk more about Black Autumn, but that's where Mustang Medicine comes in too.
Yeah. So, Jason actually came to my Sundance party for Innovation Leadership Live last year. And,
cool.
And I'd had Benton Crane on the podcast already. So I got to hear about Homestead early on. What's a struggle there? It seems like, it got picked up. Great. But, there's struggles in everything.
There's always struggles. There's always pushes and pulls. We had to, Jason is the energy behind, behind it getting to Angel Studios. And so Jason's one of the main screenwriters. And so the story changes, right? Because what we wrote in Black Autumn, we don't have a $200 million budget to make the movie. So it's like, we're going to have to tweak some stuff, And so it's a drama that takes place and moves forward, but it's really good for the character development. When I watched it, the guy who plays the Jeff character is Bailey Chase. He just does an amazing job in the movie. Like, there's a couple points where I was watching, I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly the way that Jeff character would have acted, because it's like, because the character is loosely based off of me, and the Jason character's loosely based off the Neil character, the Neil character that's on there. So But the challenge is you're always you kind of you read the script and you got to take a gulp, and go, that's a little bit different than the book, but you've got to allow that creative license to happen and allow the process to kind of unfold that's there. So it's having that open mind and that open heart that's so critical for development and for progress.
Well, I think that's most fiction writer's dream is to get a movie made of the book. So congratulations.
Oh, at 100%. I mean, it's every writer's dream, right? It's like they're making a movie out of, this little idea that Jason and I had. Wow. Oh, what? Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, so awesome. Well, listen, I want to talk about Mustang Medicine, but I want to preface with, um, I don't know if you know this. I'm at like 1,000 and something episodes. Okay. But you were actually episode number 1, but I messed up the audio so bad it never released. So this is actually a repeat visit for you. You were literally episode number 1 of this series. And I was so bad at production. I messed it all up. So I'm glad you came back, and this can't be the only time. You got to keep coming back. But, I just want to say a big thank you for these years of helping me at Child Rescue, teaching courses, helping us with law enforcement training. It's been great for somebody like me who doesn't have your background to have you backing me up, whether that's with donors, whether that's with partners, whether that's just my own thoughts of like, hey, I've got this idea. Do you think it's a good idea or not? So I want to start with that.
You know what? I mean, it's one of those things. How do you say no? Yeah, I mean, it's like when we first met and you told me what you were doing, it was like, oh, this is about as righteous of a mission as any that's on planet Earth. How can I say no? So if it's donating my time or introducing you to other people or whatnot, I mean, it's like, it's like when I said when that guy saved his dad, and it's like that one save, like it was like the Atlas stone lift off my shoulders because I was right in the midst of the the social media attacks that were going on, just lies, 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 lies. But then all of a sudden it's like, man, if this works, what's the value? What's the price? What's the cost of saving one kid? You know what I mean? Just taking one of these monsters off the street so that they can't harm any more children. That's priceless. And so when we were first talking, it was like, and I really appreciated your approach because it's the special forces approach. It's like force multiplying to get out there. And I was like, well, absolutely. I'll help support, because how can I say no? I mean, you're saving kids.
Well, yeah, obviously we feel really strongly about like, look at the force multiplier compared to what a charity can raise. Like law enforcement already have the salaries covered. Law enforcement have years of training. Law enforcement have the legal right to arrest someone. Like all these things, if we can just give them some more advanced skills to be equal with the mafia and cartels and the gangs that are unfortunately hurting kids, right? Well, the other side of it, I'm super excited about the upcoming program we're working on there together, but also not enough folks realize what a tough time it is for law enforcement officers. So many of them are moms and dads, and seeing kids get hurt, I mean, it's tough psychologically on them. And so we're really excited to be working on a pilot program to be sending some of these hero officers to Mustang Medicine for themselves as well. Can you talk about what they're going to get when they go there?
Yeah. Back in my DEA days, like I worked drugs, right? And so it's narcotics. And it was, I actually had, but narcotics and vice, are like this when you start talking prostitution, human trafficking and whatnot. And I remember vividly the first time I was kind of introduced to a guy who was a predator. He was he was selling methamphetamine. And the gal that introduced me to him had been a prostitute, a street walking prostitute for 20 years. So you can kind of get this picture, like, just a hard, hard, hard woman. And so she was working with us and she introduced me. She went in and met this guy for the first buy, and then she is introducing me for the second buy. She came back from the first buy and she said, this is a 20-year street walking prostitute. She came back and said, I will not meet that guy alone again. he's creepy. So put that into context. So when we kicked the door on this guy's house to go in and arrest him, there was like, sexual paraphernalia all over the place. And I remember vividly, like it to this day it gives me goosebumps. I remember vividly going, "Oh my gosh, this guy is evil. He is absolutely evil incarnate." And it was one of those things where, we keep finding pictures of girls and stuff like that when we're looking for drugs, and then we had to call Vice so that they could come in and start processing. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, God bless the men and women that are working this job. I don't think I'd have the intestinal fortitude to be able to work a job like that. It's just, it was working drugs was one thing, but working Vice, I was just like, oh my goodness, that's rough. So fast forward.
Well, and I want to just jump in on that story for 1 second, right? This woman who's been on the streets for 20 years, so often those stories, the part that gets left out is, average age in America of entrance into that is somewhere between 13 to 15 years old. This is not something that they chose. This is something that was forced on them, that was coerced, that was, and then if our system fails them so much that they never get out, that's how 20 years later, they're still there. Right. And that is one of the things that is like a passion for me, is people finding out, like, you're seeing this story 20 years in. What about the story 20 years ago when it was starting?
Yeah.
And how can we prevent that in the future?
And that's the thing, is this gal wasn't some grandma. She was in her 30s. And she's the one that told us that she had been, working, as a prostitute for 20 years. And it was like, oh my goodness. And so, cause you're right, she was a young girl when she started. And so, so the idea with Mustang Medicine is a lot of the lessons that I learned in high stress situations, going overseas in the counterterrorist unit and working, and bringing that back. Me and some of the other facilitators, my wife Robin is one of the facilitators, and then we've got some other ones like Hugh Vale, who's a facilitator that trains wild Mustangs, which is incredibly dangerous to do. And then we take these lessons that we've figured out or curated from other places and teach them to people, so that it helps them regulate their nervous system, so that these emotions that they build up, because as typically as men, and even women that are veterans and first responders and stuff,
can you actually give people a reference on your wife's background, if I think it'll be relevant?
Yeah, so my wife was she was in the military, and then she was a special agent, and then she worked in the intel community for about 8 or 10 years. We actually were in Afghanistan together for 2 years. And then she got out, and she was a special agent again for the federal government. And then she actually was the chief operations officer for Black Rifle Coffee for the first first year or so. And then she transitioned over to another company that they had that to help build that company up. So she's no stranger to stress and learning how to regulate stress, and tips and tricks of how to do that. And so, and that's the foundation of Mustang Medicine, is being able to pass these lessons on to people, give them tools and some practices that they can use, that they can then go home and continue to practice and learn and figure out for themselves and share with their community. Because remember, I said community is so incredibly important, so that then it helps relieve that pressure. Because when these emotional incidents happen, and it can be an emotional incident from 2 hours of driving in traffic in the morning, or seeing child pornography, it's just varying levels, right? It's a dial, maybe driving in traffic's a 3, whereas you see some of these horrific things that law enforcement are dealing with, and that's a 10. Well, all too often what happens is that emotion, or those feelings just get compartmentalized, which is just a fancy way of saying they're ignored. They just get shoved down. Well, the problem that happens over time is that builds up. And then pretty soon they're like bricks, and these bricks are on your shoulders, and pretty soon the bones just crack and fracture. And we see over and over again people, veterans and first responders and even just regular people, they haven't had a way that they could decompress, that they could face these feelings and emotions and deal with them, and not necessarily in a touchy-feely hippie kind of way, but in a scientific, practical practice way. Hey, let's look at this because it's important. It's part of the makeup, right? And so if we look at them and we deal with them and we understand what it is that they're doing and what it is that they're trying to teach us, then all of a sudden it's not that they go away, but then all of a sudden the lessons that they're teaching us, we can embrace to help elevate us in our awareness. And so we see tremendous progress in people because all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. This is very much part of the human condition. And what we like to tell people is like, look, if you don't have those feelings and emotions, we have a word for that. It's called a sociopath. That's a problem. That's a problem that absolutely needs professional help. Everybody, except for the 1% of the 1%, has got these and they're dealing with them. And it's, you can deal with them now or you'll deal with them later in life. And we see that with a teeter-totter of some of these veterans. All of a sudden, the very thing that they've been controlling their entire life, compartmentalizing their entire life, all of a sudden controls them. And they come in and some of them are emotional wrecks and they just can't seem to get ahead of the feelings and emotions that they're having because they've been building up for 20 years. And so that's what we do is we get in there and we help them recognize and see and embrace and learn from them.
Well, obviously this is something trafficking victims go through. I mean, in our own family, mother-in-law, family members, even just being around it, like it's something that, our family deals with and we're working on over time. And I'm really excited for people like you because so many of our heroes, law enforcement officers that are on the front lines, literally pulling these kids out of these abusive situations, maybe haven't had historically as much help. It's great to see the veterans community embracing it and more of this. And it just hasn't always been as much the case for our first responder community. Luckily, so many of them look up to the veterans community and the intel community. And I think it makes it easier for them to become something when it's it's by a 28-year Green Beret who was in one of the world's most elite classified counterterrorism units. And he says, it's okay, this happens to everybody. It's not weakness that you're a human, in just a minute or two, can you give us like just a brief overview of what happens over the couple days?
Yeah. So folks come in and the first thing we do is an icebreaker, right? So what we want to do is help everybody get comfortable. We do not have any ahas, we got you. We're big on people taking notes and keeping a journal. We never make you show your journal to some stranger. We hold sovereignty, personal sovereignty at the highest level. So you can sit there and not say anything all weekend. And we'll be like, okay, that's fine. That's you. You do you. Because really the big thing we're trying to teach people is listen to yourself, trust yourself. And so, and when you do that, then you maintain that personal sovereignty that's there. And so the first night is we talk about it's a little class. It's really short. We talk about connected communities and what that means. What's the difference between a connected community and a toxic community? And how do I prioritize where people are in my life? So I'm not going to them seeking things that they just flat out can't provide. So we call that the AVAR community, authentic, vulnerable, accountable, reciprocal. Then the next morning, what they do is we have what's called the lay down ceremony where Hugh brings a wild Mustang and he does this ceremony that's just amazing where the horse has to surrender. Well, the horse chooses to surrender because it's something that's actually trained to wild Mustangs. Because if a Mustang gets out and it will take off for the wild hinterlands and it will hit a fence, and Mustangs will absolutely kill themselves trying to get out of fences. So because they'll get tangled up in the wire. And so what this does is it teaches the Mustang, sit and wait, be calm. Then this, two-legged, person, the trainer, will come and free you. And so but it's a very impactful because you see the horse's nervous system is the exact same as human beings. They just don't have the prefrontal cortex. They have a very limited or primitive prefrontal cortex. And so you see all of the motions. You see the endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and the cortisol and the adrenaline as it takes place. And so it's really powerful for people. So we do that. And what we do is we teach classes, we give experiences. We teach classes, we give experiences. And so we do a sweat lodge, we do cold plunges, we do yoga, we do a holotropic breath work for breathing. It's very powerful. That's there. We walk a labyrinth because what this all does is these are all things that help you to learn to be present and look at yourself. None of them are tough guy contests. You know, the example I like to tell people is like by the letter of the law, whatever that is, you know, cold plunge is up to the collarbone, 3.5 minutes, right? And it's got to be water that's in, 50 some degrees and below. Well, sometimes, we had a gal that came through, a few ago. We've run 20 of these now. And the cold plunge to her was just below her knees. And that is all her nervous system could handle. And we were very supportive. And it was like, that's you, listen to you. That's what your body needs right now. Because what we want to do is we want to be able to embrace these practices and use the tools that we teach, like breathing and meditation and some of the finger games and neurological things that we use to help calm the nervous system, so that then we can get past that. And then over time, by the end of the session, it's 3.5 days of an immersive experience. She was all of a sudden, without blaming, shaming, and complaining from us, with just very positive peer pressure, she was able to get in completely into the water. And that's just one instance. It's a very supportive community that's there, and it's very private. We're not telling everybody who's come to the thing and all of that. It's very private. And we give you books. So we've got 4 books that we've written now that we give the participants, that when they come through, you can take notes. But that's so you can take it home and can continue to learn and practice and continue to go through this. And we encourage people, it's like, as you discover stuff, then let us know, because then as you learn new truths, we'll integrate that into the lessons that we teach at what's called Mustang Medicine. The rewilding is the retreat portion, and we will implement that into the rewilding. And we've just seen some incredibly meaningful, positive change in people. And I can say for myself too, I can legitimately say I've been through 20 of these retreats, because I'll stand up and I'll teach my portion about, the neurochemicals and whatnot and how it reacts in the brain. And then I sit down and I start taking notes in all of the other classes as well. So it's not a we and them thing. It's a we thing that's together. We sit down with the guests and we become guests ourselves and go through and talk and integrate and process all of this stuff as we go through in a very gentle, sovereign, respecting manner.
And what's the website for that?
MustangMedicine.com.
Okay. It's interesting how effective equine therapy has been for trafficking victims and abuse survivors and stuff, for those very same reasons of how many similarities horses and humans have randomly. Like, I wouldn't have guessed that, but it's interesting, this idea of, like, especially for tough guys being, or tough women, right? I tell you what, it's tough on women in DOD, intel, law enforcement, where, they're constantly being watched for being weak. And so they almost have to, like, overdo it sometimes. Some of them have told me, you know what I mean? Just to not be because they're worried about being judged. And like, it being safe to just be a human instead of pretending to be Superman is probably beneficial for anybody, but especially folks in those situations. Something I never tied on the Mustang stuff. There's a young guy, entrepreneur I've been mentoring, who we talked about, like, how he could generate business for his farrier company, like putting horseshoes on out here in Heber. And so I started teaching some classes on, like, become a key person of influence, like, have a presence, have people find out who you are. You're going to be able to charge more because we prefer to buy from someone we know. So he surprised me. He says, I'm going to set the Guinness Book World Records by taking wild Mustangs on the longest recorded trip. And like this week, he just got back from a year. He did 3,000 miles back and forth across the United States and back. It's the YouTube channel. It's called Year of the Mustang with Jake Harvath.
Oh, wow.
Everybody should check it out. But I for sure need to get you and Jake together. We're actually going to lunch on Friday, but I need to get you and Jake together and talk about Mustang stuff. And he did it to raise awareness for the plight of wild horses in America and how many times there's some not so helpful things happening to them, but people could do more. And anyways, I'm super proud of him. And like his episode that came out, I think yesterday or today, was a snowstorm a week ago in Wyoming when he was dropping into Idaho. It's just like, it looks like pioneers from the 1850s. He's got this big beard and all this stuff from all these months on the road, But he's had so many people reach out to him and give him places to stay all across this trip. All these horse people across America said, come stay with us. We'll take care of you and the horse, and giving him places to sleep. And it's actually built him a community. So I got to get you and Jake Harvath together.
Yeah, and I'm sure Hugh has probably heard of him. I mean, geez, Hugh probably knows him, but I would love that. I'd love that. That sounds like a grand, I bet he's just got stories for days about, all of the stuff that he saw and did while doing that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, listen, we obviously didn't cover a tenth of the things we could have. We're going to have to be back on the show. What do you want to leave people with? What do you want to leave people with, though, today?
I think the big message, as I've entered into this season of my life, I'm in my 50s now, and I realize just how incredibly important a positive attitude is on life, and looking at life, that life happens for you, not to you. And when I changed my mindset, with the course of these retreats and stuff like that, I can look at the biggest disappointments that I had in my life, the times that I just got kicked in the guts the hardest, and I can honestly look back and go, thank goodness that happened, because if it hadn't, then I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And I love where I'm at today and where I'm headed, and my relationship with my wife and with my kids and all of that. It's just I'm unbelievably blessed, and it comes from turning those traumas, for lack of a better term, turning those traumas into teachers and seeing the positive side.
Well, I've actually really looked up to the way that you have always made your boys a priority. I know you're big in the Boy Scouts program and these things of like, everybody loves their kids, but sometimes for ambitious people, we don't always do as good a job like having our schedule line up with what we say our priorities are. And there's so many times that I've called you or text you, hey, can you talk? I'm just busy doing something with my boys. Can we talk tomorrow? Or you've really like kind of set an example for me on that. It's funny, some of these messages from you, because like I remember me and you and the Delta Force guy were talking about Tom Bigley going to MMA fight with one of your buddies. I think it was like Jeremy Horn or somebody who pro MMA guy, and you had fought MMA competitively, and then you're talking about this stuff that a lot of tough guys historically haven't wanted to talk about. And so I think it's extra fun coming from you, that gives everybody permission to just be a human instead of this like cardboard cutout version of ourselves we wish people believed in.
Well said. Well said.
Okay. Thanks again for doing this, folks. Stay tuned. We're going to get Jeff back on the show again. Bye now.